All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to talk about personality, but we're going to go way beyond just introvert and extrovert. We're going to look at a much richer and, frankly, more scientific view of who we are. So here's our game plan. We'll start with the basics, the classic duo. Then we'll literally peek inside the brain to see what's going on. We'll explore that murky middle ground, introduce a brand new idea, and finally, see why all of this really matters when it comes to things like leadership. Okay, first things first. Let's just reset our whole understanding of the basics. See, the psychologist Carl Jung didn't introduce these as social styles. Not at all. He saw them as fundamental attitudes based on where we point our energy.
It really all boils down to your personal energy battery. If you're an introvert, you recharge by spending time alone. But if you're an extrovert, you get that energy boost from being around other people. Simple as that.
Now this is really, really important. We have to bust the biggest myth out there. Introversion is not shyness. They are not the same thing. Shyness comes from a place of fear of being judged. Introversion is just, it's a preference for how you manage your energy.
So let's get into the science of it, because this is where it gets fascinating. It turns out with these preferences we have, they're actually hardwired right into our neurobiology. You've got two key chemicals at play here, dopamine and acetylcholine. Extroverts are always chasing that dopamine rush, that reward you get from new, exciting stuff. Introverts, on the other hand, are more sensitive to dopamine. Too much can feel overwhelming. They get their feel-good reward from acetylcholine, which is all about calm, deep focus.
And get this, the differences are actually structural. We can see them. Introverts' brains tend to have a thicker prefrontal cortex, which is for deep thought, and they have this longer blood flow pathway. That's a big part of why an introvert might pause and think for a second before they speak.
So, if it's not a simple on or off binary, but a whole spectrum, you have to ask, right, what's happening in the middle? Well, this is where we find two really distinct types that people get mixed up all the time, the ambivert and the omnivert.
So first up is the ambivert. The best way to picture their personality is like a dial. They can just smoothly turn their social energy up or down depending on what the situation calls for. They're always trying to find that comfortable balance.
Then you have the omnivert. Now their personality is much more like a light switch. It's either all the way on and they are super extroverted, or it's all the way off and they're completely introverted. There's really not much of a middle ground for them.
So just to put it another way, think of it like this. An ambivert is a balanced blend, kind of like mixing hot and cold water to get the perfect temperature. An omnivert, though, they run either steaming hot or icy cold, and they just switch between the two.
Okay, now for a really fascinating, newer idea that actually moves completely off that energy spectrum. It's called the outrovert, and it suggests there might be a whole third axis to personality. So an outrovert, it comes from that Spanish word otro, for other, is defined by this feeling of otherness. It's not that they're antisocial, not at all. They just don't feel a deep need to fuse their own identity with that of a group.
The psychiatrist who's really pushing this concept explains that autotroverts can be super friendly, totally socially capable, but they almost always feel like they're standing just a little bit outside the group, looking in. Yeah, their whole orientation is just different. They don't turn inward like an introvert or outward like an extrovert. They kind of turn elsewhere, guided by their own compass, their own independent thoughts.
Okay, so this is all great, but how does it actually apply in a practical setting? Let's take the workplace. For decades, we've had this idea that one particular personality type is the ideal leader.
And this bias even has a name. It's called the extrovert ideal. But as you might guess, the latest research shows a much more nuanced picture of what actually makes a great leader.
What the research really shows is that a leader's success is contingent. It depends on the team. Introverted leaders, it turns out, are often more effective with proactive teams because they're better listeners. Extroverted leaders, on the other hand, can thrive when they're managing more passive teams that really need that top-down motivation.
And this just highlights the unique strengths that introverts bring to leadership roles. We're talking about qualities like deep listening and careful, deliberate decision-making, things that are often overlooked but are incredibly valuable.
So in the end, when you move beyond these rigid, old-school labels, you start to appreciate the unique strengths that every personality type brings to the table. And that's how you create more effective and, honestly, more inclusive environments.
Understanding this expanding spectrum is absolutely key. It is not about figuring out which box you fit into.
It's about appreciating all the diverse, complex, and amazing ways we are all wired to think, to act, and to connect with the world.
Exploring the threads of human behavior is a journey without limits. Join us as we weave together